A pitcher cries for water and a person for work that is real. Oftentimes, we talk about, is our service spiritual or is it social justice oriented? And I think that's a false dichotomy. That false dichotomy that there is either an inward self or an outward self. That part of who we are as social beings and part of our true spirituality is reaching out to each other and putting ourselves in situations that feel risky, because that's how we learn about who we are, who we really are inside. At the last Change Clergy Caucus meeting, I announced that the Unitarian Universalists were going to have a Miracle Sunday to pay our change dues, and I laughed and they laughed too. For they knew that a Miracle Sunday is a foreign concept to UUs. A Miracle Sunday is when the preacher gets in the pulpit and makes a dramatic sermon and increases the emotional fervor to the degree that wallets explode like fountains and cash descends like water and checks like an ever-flowing stream. In a Miracle Sunday sermon, I would explain that change is an acronym that stands for communities, helping all neighbors gain empowerment. And I would preach with fervor how our sixth principle states that we support the goal of world community with peace and liberty and justice for all. Our second principle calls for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Our fourth principle calls for the use of the democratic process within our congregations and then in society at large. And after I reacquainted us with our spiritual roots, I could ask the probing question: is this fellowship living up to its principles? I could call on the Holy Spirit of Henry David Thoreau, who said, "If you have built your castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them." Are we putting the foundations under our castles in the sky? Are we walking the walk that we talk? Are we really committed to community? Are we just talking of justice? Are we demonstrating progress in the democratic process? Are we being the change we want to see in the world? In a Miracle Sunday sermon, these questions are designed to introduce discomfort. They suggest that we are not doing enough. If asked with enough fervor, they may make the congregation feel guilty. Guilty of a sin of omission. And guilt calls for an act of contrition, often in the form of a contribution, that makes you feel like you're part of the solution, contributing to the evolution of the change revolution. A Miracle Sunday sermon fans the flames of fervor. It feeds the frenzy of the faithful. It creates generosity. It produces philanthropy. It relieves the emotion of guilt with the promotion of giving. It leaves everyone feeling sanctified, justified, and glorified, even churchified. Then I realized that is what I don't like about change. Boy, a community change meeting feels like a Sunday going to meeting. They are emotional theater, a political pep rally. For 3 years, I've been trying to get members of this congregation to get interested in change by going to the spectacles of the meetings. And I've often left the meetings feeling churchified. I have witnessed many failures of my minister colleagues failing to be inclusive. They try to be inclusive, but they often get filled with the Spirit and go off the script. Some of the participants cannot conceive that there is any motivation for doing good other than God. God is often invoked to provoke people into action. Not the best strategy for a Unitarian Universalist. I realized I could stand these meetings because I had seen these ministers behind the scenes in work meetings with the thoughtful planning and actions of subcommittees. I had seen the men and women behind the curtain of the public meeting. And unlike the Wizard of Oz, the people behind the curtain are much more interesting to me than the public performance. That is why, instead of a miracle Sunday for change, I am declaring this a practical Sunday. What I like about change is not the hype. I like the work behind the scenes. When I first came to this community, I was involved in Crossing 52. And I heard that the school board was going to discontinue the Equity Commission. And Crossing 52 was instrumental in getting the Equity Commission established because the school, about 1995 or 6, decided that they were going to create new districts. And we warned them, or the people at the time warned them, that this will resegregate the schools. And they said, oh no, it won't resegregate the schools. But we'll form this Equity Commission to study that, to make sure it doesn't happen. Well, the Equity Commission studied it for 5 years. They came back with their report and said, it happened. And the school board decided, well, maybe we don't need an Equity Commission anymore. So I went down to the school board, and they have a little segment of time where they get public comment, and I spoke with fervor while someone balanced their checkbook, and then after the public comment period was over, they went on with their own agenda. It seemed that no one was listening. I got the relief of being prophetic and profound, as I always am. But it didn't do any good. Change was different. It came into town, invited by the Interfaith Partnership. And what they did, they asked us to go to our congregations and ask what is important. And we had cottage meetings, and about 65 people in this congregation participated, and we had like little sheets of paper, and we wrote down what we thought were important, we voted on them, and we sent that to them. And then a lot of other congregations did that. And we found that we had a lot in common with a lot of the other congregations. It helped that three of the most active other congregations are Wake Forest Baptist and St. Anne's over Episcopals and Green Street. But one of the things that came out was that the schools really need work done. And one of the things that changed is before we go and just demand something, we should go and see what the problem is. And we organized teams, and we walked through schools with little clipboards and saying, are these windows right? Are these sidewalks right? What's this playground? And we had a list of concrete items that needed fixing in the schools. And when we came up with this list, we said the next bond issue should address some of these things in inner city schools. And the superintendent came to a meeting at Temple Emmanuel, and he pledged that the next bond issue would have 50% for inner city schools and 50% for the suburbs. And then later at a meeting, I saw the actual bond that was proposed in 2005. And the only school that was included that was within the city limits was Moore School, and they were going to get them new windows. So literally all that they had proposed was window dressing for the inner city schools. And we said, boy, that's not what we asked for. And then we noticed that they had these public comment meetings that often you do when you are proposing something, and none of them were on the east side of Winston. And so we said, well, let's have one at Carver School. And we had 400 people show up at Carver School. A lot of phone calls, and they realized, we can't just propose this bond and have all the good-hearted people say, school bond, I'm for schools, we're going to get through it. They're actually looking at what's in the bond. And that's why this year's bond, that was under 2006, had a 50-50 split between money that designated for within the city limits and beyond. It's that practical, hard work. Not the rah-rah cheerleading, not the inspiration. It's that practical theology that's right along the lines of Unitarian Universalism. Behind all the big actions are people. People working on teams, gathering data and processing it, trying to determine not only what's the right thing to do, but what's the right thing to do at this time, a battle we could win. And that takes work. And it's working with people from different congregations and getting to know them as friends where the magic, the practical magic of change is. And this work is being done across the nation. One of the miracles of this week was that I agreed to do this sermon, and then from the UUA, I got a booklet. A social justice approach to revitalizing congregational life. Congregation-based community organizing. And so the UUA is now sending out official documents about places like Change, and Change is listed as one of the groups that UU churches are involved with across the nation. 10% of our congregations are involved in this type of group. 45 of them are groups that are affiliated with the International Industrial Areas Foundation, which is the national parent group of Change. And this booklet, which is you can order online or borrow my copy, talks about how this is a good thing to participate in groups like Change, because it gives us a practical way to interact with the rest of the community. It can be difficult interacting with people whose theology excludes us. And I see it as an opportunity to educate them, to let them know that there are many motivations for doing good in society. After working side by side with UUs, people from traditional religions will have a harder time writing us off. If someone in the community calls us a cult, those who know our works will defend our character. But we also have to be more accepting. We cannot write off all Christians as people who promise pie in the sky by and by while ignoring the problems of today. I have spent more time at the Pilot Mountain Baptist Association than I ever imagined I would when I moved to Winston-Salem. One of the most underrated parts of the Change organization is the one-on-one meeting. People are encouraged to talk with another individual for an hour and to talk about a specific thing. What good do you want to do in the world? And to sit down at a lunch with somebody and have this conversation, it's not the level of conversation that we usually have. I mean that, sometimes comments about what Wake might or not might do, Wake Forest, sometimes dominates some people's thoughts, especially yesterday. But we often spend so much time, even with people we know or we think we know, talking about the news of the day. But to take an hour and to sit with somebody and says, what motivates you? What good do you want to do in the world? You start wondering what good you want to do in the world, and then you actually have to ask yourself that question, because you know you're having a meeting with this person. You want to at least have a coherent answer. Change is about committing to work together. We learn about each other and find out what we have in common. We put aside differences and work for the common good. Does not mean that individual congregations do not work on issues that are specific to them. But it's about not letting our differences be a barrier to the good work we can do together. You have envelopes in your order of service, and I do want you to put money in those envelopes, not because you believe in miracles, but because you believe in the practical. At the last congregational meeting, we voted to support change. We will be stronger by seeking allies in the faith communities, stronger by working together. And also in there is a form. And it's another way to support change. And I ask you to fill that out too. It has different things that people are interested in, and also talks about different skills. And it's a way to give of yourself and put yourself in a situation around the table with 5 or 6 other people and say, what can we do about this? What can we do about health care? What can we do about education? What can we do about trails, bike trails in the city? What can we do to make Winston-Salem a community, a place where people respect each other? And it's through this work, this day-to-day, week-to-week planning and listening, that the practical magic of change happens. It's exciting when we have 400 people show up at a meeting and money gets sent back into the health care downtown health center. But then the next year, sometimes that doesn't happen. But what remains is that relationship of saying, I know I am not alone in this community for wanting good things. And as Unitarian Universalists who profess to be accepting, it really sometimes is a challenge to be in a situation where you say, oh my goodness, this person's worldview is diametrically opposed to mine, yet somehow, by some practicality, we both want our kids to go to schools where the plumbing works. And we think that all kids should get that. And then you say, I can't write them off. They can't write me off, because we are one people. And even though interfaith work sometimes involves work with groups that might be in opposition to us in some other ways, even opposition is not bad. I often think of the religions as living on the fingertips. Judaism, Hinduism, Christianity, Unitarian Universalism. And sometimes things are opposed. But if we did not have an opposable thumb, this push and pull of working together, of working our way through conflict, so much would not get done. And by working together, you realize that even though you're opposed on some levels, in the depth of your humanity, we can be together. I think of a story I heard. I think someone was moving into a town in Colorado, and they were at the laundromat and saying, "What church should I go to?" And the lady was giving a couple churches, and she said, "Well, there's a church near my house. It's Unitarian Universalist church." And the lady says, "Oh, don't go there. They don't believe in anything but loving each other and doing good works." And when this person went to the UU church and told them that, that became the slogan on their T-shirt. And that's where the work of change comes down. It is a spiritual practice. It is believing with your whole self in the goodness that you can do. So at this time, I ask you to read along with me the words of offering. And offerings can be your regular pledge payment and or your information, your change, whatever you're motivated to give. Let us read these words together. We earn money by spending our precious energy. How we spend our energy, time, and money reflects what we value in life. The offertory is Appalachian Sunrise.